Joining me now is best-selling author and commentator Douglas Murray. Douglas, Kamala Harris has gone from hiding from interviews to doing a multitude of them in recent days, from the vacuous and risque Call Her Daddy podcast to sitting down with the ladies of The View. She also talked to Howard Stern and Stephen Colbert. Colbert asked her how she's different to Joe Biden.
When we think about the significance of what this next generation of leadership looks like, were I to be elected president, it is about, frankly, I love the American people, and I believe in our country. I love that it is our character and nature to be an ambitious people. You know, we have aspirations, we have dreams.
Douglas, would you like to translate that for us? Are you fluent in word salad?
Well, I am now, like all of us, Rita. I've learned, as we all have had to in the last few months. This has been the same sort of thing that she's done in every interview that you've just mentioned in recent days. People said for a long time, why is Kamala Harris not giving interviews? We knew why. It was because of this. She was asked in another interview this week about the border policy, and she started talking about how, the American people are and opportunity. And it's the same thing. She just flounders like this. And it's just terrifying, quite frankly. She can't answer a straight question. She can't answer a policy question. She does these horrible, vague ramblings. She hasn't even, it seems, got the nous to just think on her feet. I mean, when she's asked, about Joe Biden, she should be able by now to have a stock answer about how terrific he was, but how there's more to do and so on. And she can't do that, despite all of these Democrat cheerleaders in the media giving her the softest of softball questions.
Well, this is what's remarkable. She has had these soft questions and she still flounders. On The View, she was asked about how she would have done things differently over the last 4 years. And she said she couldn't think of a thing she would do differently to Joe Biden. I would have thought if you're the change candidate, you'd have at least a couple of things you'd mentioned there. Now, we are hearing in this election time a lot of talk about disinformation and misinformation, fact checks. You wrote in the New York Post recently that fact checks have become politicised, and it's now not about the objective truth, but what's in the eye of the beholder. Tell me about that, because it was a time where you could trust a fact check. You knew that was just going to be unequivocally accurate. No longer.
No, that's the case. I mean, I thought this was particularly striking during the vice presidential debates last week, the debate last week, when the moderator, once again, as with the presidential debates, only really fact-checked one side, which is, of course, the Republicans. And when they did this with J.D. Vance, as they'd done it with Donald Trump before, he pushed back against the fact checker and said, actually, what you've just said isn't accurate. And he was right, as it happened on that occasion. There's this effort at the moment to pretend that the southern border has been pretty secure in recent years because Kamala Harris was for a looser border 4 years ago. She's for a strong border now, it seems, to the extent that one can divine anything, as I say. But J.D. Vance, picked up on this thing. What the fact checkers were doing was trying to pretend that people who had got a Kamala Harris era effectively slip on immigration were in some ways fully, wholly American. And how dare you say that these guys in Springfield, Ohio, weren't as American as you and me, J.D., was effectively the point of the questioner. This is something that the media in America in particular is doing. And it's very striking to me because I've said many times that, facts and truth in journalism are absolutely vital. But the very institutions that talk about how vital they are, like, for instance, the BBC, which has set up something called BBC Verify in the last year to tell you about facts and to fact check, keep on getting things wrong. And not just wrong, but what's always noticeable is they get them wrong in a particular direction. There's a pattern. Now, you could say objectivity in journalism is completely impossible. Complete objectivity is impossible. Fine, at least you know where some people are coming from. At least you know, as I said in the New York Post, you know that if you pick up the New York Post, we at the New York Post are not soft on crime. We don't love the stuff. We don't like it. So you know where the Post is coming from on the issues of, for instance, being allowed to ransack your local CVS, good or bad. You know the Post will be against that. But these other media, the BBC and ABC and so on, they all do the same thing. They pretend to be impartial fact checkers. In actual fact, they're just not that subtly pushing everything in a very specific lockstep ideological direction.
Absolutely. And on the New York Post, it had a remarkable front page recently about Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, who's accused of slapping a former girlfriend. The allegations there are terrible. This week, there were fresh allegations of misogynistic and inappropriate behaviour towards female staff during his stint at a top law firm in Los Angeles. And we know Douglas, in his first marriage, he cheated on his wife with a nanny, apparently got the nanny pregnant. But the remarkable thing is, despite the salacious nature of these allegations, the media is largely uninterested in following this. And in fact, some segments of the media have painted him as some sort of model of modern healthy masculinity.
Oh, well, that's straightforward how the latter bit happened. He rainbow washed himself, as you saw there. All you have to do now is to wear a Love is Love t-shirt and appear at some, pride parade. And then that can sort of absolve you. It's like the Catholic Church throwing holy water on you in the past. So that's why he gets away with that. That and the fact that he's married to the Democrat candidate. You can look. I mean, these allegations. If they were against J.D. Vance or Donald Trump or their spouses, but this would be absolutely front page news. I mean, J.D. Vance can't grow a beard without the entire Democrat media becoming obsessed about it and asking what it means for the future of the Republic or something. If J.D. Vance had been found to have treated women in the ways that Doug Emhoff is accused of treating them, well, you can't pretend that this isn't something that they would take an interest in. Or again, okay, one remove the spouse of the candidate. It's just another demonstration of something, as I say, all of the public can see now. The interesting thing about the era of social media, among other things, is that it's made a lot of this old media completely transparent to the public. They can see the game now. We didn't used to be able to see the whole game. Like, it's visible now. What was visible to journalists, people who'd worked in journalism all their lives 20 years ago, is now common knowledge to everybody. The New York Times and so on, they don't have secrets anymore. They think they do, but they don't. We can see them.
Well, absolutely, and it's possibly why trust in the media is at historic lows. Certainly in the US, there's been polling showing only 1 in 10 Republicans trust the media. So yeah, social media has been a godsend in a lot of ways. Earlier this week, we marked October 7, the first anniversary of the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and segments of the media used the date to attack Israel and its ongoing war with Hamas. The Independent in the UK had this front page, 365 days of horror since October 7. Douglas, they went on to list the number of bombs Israel has dropped, the number of hospitals damaged in Gaza, the number of buildings, you get the idea. They used October 7 to highlight the impact of the counter-offensive, not what actually started the war.
Yeah, of course they did. I mean, it's completely sick. But, It's a remarkable thing, this, Rita, and I've been thinking about this week because a very brilliant scholar called Ruth Wise, emeritus professor at Harvard, back from the days when institutions like Harvard really produced top-rate people, said it's quite hard to say anything new about October the 7th, even a year on, because we can see it in plain sight. The terrorists broadcast everything. They didn't hide anything. Ruth Wise said something very interesting. She said, some people in the West have got the ability to understand what that day was against the Jewish state. Not everybody can. The Independent and some other idiots can't tell that. They can't even commemorate an anniversary without trying to flip it onto another aspect of the story. But what she said that really struck me was, she said, we may have the courage to do that, but the West has not displayed the ability to have the courage to identify the perpetrators. Had the courage, some people have had the courage, the recognition of who the victims were, but the perpetrators, a year on, how is it possible that there are pro-Hamas demonstrations in Australia, in America, in Canada, across Europe? How come so much of the media has, like the Independent you just showed there, to the extent that it is still a paper, how have they ended up just regurgitating Hamas figures? Why have we ended up in this period? And this was, as you say, it was the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. We have the ability to identify that, but why not to identify the Nazis? Why not to identify the people who did it?
Yeah.
Why not ask why it is that in countries like Australia, I have seen these demonstrations of supporters of the Nazis, of the people who did the massacres? Why do we have to see mobs in New York smashing at car windows, screaming support for the Nazis who carried out October the 7th? It's because some people still have the ability, thank goodness, to recognize who the victims were, but almost nobody has the courage to identify who the perpetrators were, what's driving them, and the fact that they are among us in the West.
Oh, that is an excellent point. That is so true. And you would think all those protesters, how much more credibility they would have and how much more support if they could just condemn Hamas. Even if you want to see the war end, their refusal to condemn, and in fact, the hostility to those who turn up to a protest holding a Hamas, a terrorist sign, I think speaks volumes. Before you go, a Russian arms dealer who was known as the Merchant of Death, who was released by the US to Russia as part of a prisoner swap in exchange for WNBA player Brittany Griner, he's reportedly selling weapons to the Houthi terrorists who are wreaking havoc in the Red Sea. This looks like a terrible exchange for the US, Douglas.
It does, rather. Brittany Griner has spent all of her time since being swapped by the US government. She has spent all of her time moaning about how awful the US is. And meantime, this guy ends up continuing his career, in this case, arming terrorists. It wasn't a good deal, that. And, maybe there's, I always think that, you can't judge what somebody who's been arrested and detained in the way that Brittany Griner has, you can't judge what they do to some extent because they've been through a terrible circumstance. But you'd have thought that there could be some gratitude to the country that nurtured them, made them rich, that they had slightly let down, and which had saved them. But no, of course, in our time, as you know, Rita, as we've spoken about before, you can never express gratitude to a Western democracy. It's got to be moaning and carping and all of that and whining. But never gratitude, never realizing how lucky we are in the West, how lucky we are in America and Australia and Britain and Europe. Never that, never gratitude, always whining.
Yes, it's all about victimhood. That's the currency these days. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.